Okay, Boker Tov, Shavua Tov. Welcome back, everybody. We're continuing Hilchot Shabbat, Tzurba, volume 17. We are on page 125. We started discussing, having gone through the Hilchot of Kavod Shabbat, of Adlakat Nerov, of Kiddush Makom Seudah. We started talking a little bit about Oneg Shabbat, about the 3 meals of Shabbat, the obligation to have special food as part of Oneg Shabbat as well. So on page 125, you'll see the Rambam. The Rambam writes, Ezu Oneg, זהו שאמרו חכמים שצריך לתקן תבשיל שמן ביותר משקה מבוסם. What is Oneg Shabbat? That's what our Sage said when I have to prepare. Doesn't mean that you have to have one of those red labels on the food that says high in trans fats. That's not what it means. But it has to have one particularly prepare special delicacies for Shabbat, food and drink, right? Interesting and important. He says, according to a person's financial status, the more that a person is able to spend financially in terms of the expenses for Shabbat, preparing nice foods, that is praiseworthy. Obviously, this means within a person's means. Right? The idea is very oftentimes, it's in all sorts of areas of halakha. People ask, which hefsher should they buy, which mezuzah should they buy, whatever. So I have a colleague who once gave a share explaining to people about different the kashrut of mezuzah, sefer Torah, tefillin, things like that. And you can get people sometimes go to the shop or go to the sofer and say, I don't understand. What's the big deal? This is kosher. This is kosher. This is mahadrin. This is mahadrin min mahadrin. Why not? If it's kosher, it's good enough. Why can't I just buy that? Why do I need the more expensive one? He said to them, when you go to buy a car, you just buy one that works, one that will just get you from A to B, or do you spend a little bit more? It's the same way you think about when you buy a car, when you buy things. You should think about when you buy a clay kodesh, right? The same, there is obviously, but a person, kosher is kosher, but modar is modar, and there's a reason, and it's better, and it's if a person is able to afford it, in a person's financial status. So number one is, person shouldn't say, that's the point. Person shouldn't say, I'm going to spend all my money on physical pleasures and things which are for myself. But when it comes to, it's the best of both worlds. Talking about Oneg Shabbat, this is for the sake of Hashem. This is you're going to get the benefit from the food as well, right? So why not? But that's the first thing. A person shouldn't be stingy in that sense to underspend below their means. At the same time, and he alludes to it here, a person shouldn't overspend as well. What he says here, that a person should spend. Right, it doesn't mean a person's struggling to make ends meet and Shabbat I'm just going to go and buy the most expensive foods and 17-course meals. No, that's not what a person is meant to do. Although the Gemara does say that the meaning on Rosh Hashanah a person is judged, and it is determined how much a person is going to have to spend for the entire year. And it says that the money that you spend on, I think it's also that Shabbat and Chag and Chinuch is not actually included within that. There's an extra allowance for that. But nonetheless, it says there's a fascinating Mishnah Berurah, which will be at the end of Hilchot Yom Tov. And the Mishnah Berurah says over there at the end of Hilchot Yom Tov that a person should spend within their means. It says you have determined how much you have to spend, but a person can spend beyond that. You've got to determine how much is going to come in. You don't have to determine how much is going to go out. So if a person is irresponsible in that sense, then that is also not correct. But a person should, based on what is appropriate, but it should be a little bit more than one has during the week. It should be something, and if that means a person needs to cut back during the week in order to spend more on Shabbat, so of course that is the appropriate thing to do. Says the Shulchan Aruch. We're on page 125, source number 46. So somebody is dependent on others, if somebody is unable to support themselves independently, financially. But nonetheless, he has a small amount for himself. Okay, so he has to withstand the temptation to spend the money on other things, and he should keep it for Kavod Shabbat. Person who cannot afford anything, the only money he has, okay. So then he would have to eat on Shabbat like we did. If you have a little bit, so then that's what he says. Okay, you should limit your spending on other days and hold back a little bit in order that on Shabbat you can You can honor Shabbat in that way. Over the page, Mishnah Berurah. Until now, we've spoken about the one who's buying. What about the seller has to know as well that it's not fair to, you might say everybody's going to come, everybody needs to come by for Shabbat, and therefore, I remember once went to a certain shop to buy a piece of meat before Rosh Hashanah. So I asked the seller in the shop. I said, can I have a whatever certain kind of meat, and he gave me, and it was very, very big. I said, no, smaller like that. He said, מי שקונה בשפע בראש השנה, יש לו שפע בכל השנה. That was what he said. He said, you buy בשפע, right? On Rosh Hashanah, buy a nice piece, you'll have nice for the whole year. So I turned to him. I said, no, you've got it wrong. I said, מי שקונה בשפע בראש השנה, יש לך שפע בכל השנה.
Good answer.
Anyway, he laughed and I think he gave me a smaller piece. I'm not sure I ever went back there, but that's another case. So says the Mishnah Berurah here, this exact point. He says, L'chaved Shabbat, source number 47. Tov l'zayeh shelo yitzpot mishnei tavshilin. Again, I know I say this often, but I'm always amazed when we think about what we have, the bracha that we have in our lives, the choice, the quantity, as opposed to what was once upon a time. Mishnah Berurah, it's not that long ago in the previous generation, and he says, Tov l'zayeh shelo yitzpot mishnei tavshilin. It's good that a person should have not less than 2 cooked foods. But if anybody here ever considered having less than 2 cooked foods over Shabbos? I mean, we have, the average nowadays is much more than that. But anyway, that was the situation. So he says, one should have fish at each of the 3 meals, as we discussed last week. That's if you like fish. Right? Person does not like fish, one does not need to eat it. Shabbat Oneg nitan below letzar. This is all part of the mitzvah of Oneg Shabbat, not for sorrow, not for pain. Right? Now, what happens if everybody knows? The fishmongers know that everybody has to have Shabbat, everybody has to have fish for all 3 meals, so they're going to raise all the prices. Then you should make a takana in the community that for a number of Shabbatot nobody will buy fish. Until the price goes back to something reasonable. So we're learning not just Torah, we're learning about economics as well. And he says, don't worry, if it's going to happen and they're going to raise the prices and for a few weeks you're going to put a cherem on the fish sellers, okay, so you can find something else, maybe get some meat, get some fruit, whatever it is, to have Oneg Shabbat instead. Okay, but that is the principle that comes out. One should have some fine foods, delicacies, right? Part of our Shabbat menu. The Gemara, Masechet Menachot, source number 48. He says, Tanya Ayah Rabbi Meir Omer, Chayav Adam Levarech, 100 brachot b'chol yom. Relatively well-known idea that every day we have an obligation to say 100 brachot. Ne'emar v'ataysa Hashem Elokech Yisrael me'emar. It's learned from the pasuk, or probably just from Asmachta, but the pasuk says, Ma Hashem Elokech Yisrael me'emar. What does Hashem ask from you? Ma means what? Rabbi Chia, Braid, Rabbi Avia, right, so here it doesn't actually say, but we learn out that you don't read it as ma, but you read it as mea, meaning 100. That's the illusion, that's the asmachta to the fact that one has 100 brachot. So he says, B'shavta v'yomei tova tarach u'ma'leilo ispamaki u'magadi. That therefore on Shabbat and Yom Tov have spices and sweet fruits, etc., to have the extra brachot. The Mishnah Berurah in Hilchot brachot does a cheshbon, does a calculation of how we get to 100 brachot every day. And it's very, very straightforward. If you're doubling 3 times a day, so already the Shmona Esrei, which has got not 18 but 19 brachot, that's already 57 before we've even begun. You add on Birkot HaShachar and on Tilat Yadayim, and the person eats once or twice, and add a few very, very quickly on a weekday, you get to over 100 brachot, no problem. Shabbat and Yom Tov, it's a little bit more complicated because we don't say this one, we still call it the Shmona Esrei, but it's only got 7 brachot. So we're losing quite a lot of brachot there. You have extra because you have more meals. We don't necessarily always eat bread, right? If you eat bread at a meal, you have 6 or 7 brachot because you have Tilat Yadayim, and then you have Amot Yirachim Na'amitz, and then Birkat HaMazon itself is 4 brachot. So that's 6. If you have Birkat HaMazon over a glass of wine, the person is benching, it's Brei Pragafen and then Ala Gefen as well, so that's already 8. Okay, but nonetheless, so we add on extra, so not only is it a fulfillment of Oneg Shabbat, but it helps us to get to these extra 100 brachot. Says the Shulchan Aruch over here, in source number 49, Siman Resh Tzadik, Yarbeh beperot u'megadim u'minei reach, right, fruit and delicacies, also you could smell things, kedei lashlim minyan mea brachot, in order that you have 100 brachot. Obviously, in a way that the bracha is required, it would not be, a person shouldn't make up extra brachot. If I need to say shakol and have the food that's in front of me, then stop, say, right, if I say shakol again. No, we're not talking about that, but do it in the appropriate way before you eat. But so you have a kiddush, you have a Oneg Shabbat, or Friday night, and Shabbos morning, whatever it is, have that extra food that is both the fulfillment of Oneg Shabbat and of getting to these 100 brachot. Now, another halacha here, which is related, not everybody knows about, source number 50, Masechet Psachim, says, Kvod Yom Kvod Laila, Kvod Yom Kodem. The honor of the day of Shabbat precedes the honor of the night of Shabbat. Okay, very interesting and very important. Not everybody realizes. Sometimes, there are some places where Friday night is Shabbat, and then Shabbat day is Saturday. That's incorrect. That's for many reasons. But of the two, Shabbat, the daytime actually takes precedence. So what is the implication of this? Number 51, the Mishnah Berurah tells us, Kegon sheyesh lo ma'at minei megadim. Let's say you have a certain delicacy, a certain fine food. You only have one on. I could have it either at night or I can have it during the day. When are you going to have it? You'll tell me when you have guests. But the Mishnah Berurah says something else. He says, you could only have it for the night or the day. Better to leave it for the daytime meal. Meaning you should add on for the night time, but you should add on more for the daytime. That is the Kvod Yom, which is adif to the Kvod Laila. Why should the daytime take priority? Explains the Aruch HaShulchan. He says, Atam de Kvod Yom Kodem. So first of all, his main meals generally are eaten at the day and not at night. Okay, you can argue with that if that's the case. But he gives other reasons as well. He says, Interesting. He says, why do I say that the daytime is more important than nighttime? Because at night you've eaten during the day, so you're not necessarily so hungry. We've discussed in the past that because of this, there are limitations on how much a person should be eating on Friday afternoon, right? But he says the daytime, everybody's hungry, you come, you have a nice meal, okay. When we had the Beit HaMikdash, the fact that it was Shabbat is more recognizable in the daytime and not at night. Why? Because there are special korbanot, korban musaf of Shabbat, which is brought in the day, not at night, and therefore there's an idea that the day takes precedence. We got musaf, everything is on that section. Okay, I just want to skip for a moment. If you go to the end of the shiur, so it's on page 130. Go back after 136. Just some interesting sources which are brought here. We have until now, in this year and all the previous shiurim on Hilchot Shabbat, been discussing the aspects of Kavod Shabbat, Oneg Shabbat. We've been discussing the positive aspect of Zachor at Yom HaShabbat Lekod Shabbat. Whereas there is, of course, also a mitzvah of Shamor, right? Zachor v'Shamor b'dibur echad. That is the negative prohibitions. Most probably of the halachic literature dealing with Shabbat deals with the negative prohibitions, the things you cannot do. And sometimes we spend too much time talking about what we cannot do, not talking about what we can do, and that's why people, it's a terrible thing. I've been in places where Shabbat looks something like this. You have your meal or whatever it is, and everybody's sitting around in the house, and everybody's sitting and doing whatever they're doing, and the kids are all looking at their watches saying, when does Shabbat go out? 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 The terrible thing, it's not meant to be that way. Sometimes if we only focus on what we can't do, so we forget about what we can. Shabbat is a wonderful gift, and there are many things that we can do. That which we can't, the Shamor is there to provide us with a framework, to provide us with a misgaret, in order that we can fill the Shabbat with elevated pursuits. And that is why it's very, very important to focus, as we have been, on these positive aspects, not just the negative aspects. Have a look at the Ramban. The Ramban on source number 17, page 136. He says, Emetu gamken, ki midat zachor amdu mitzvat aseh. Zachor, as we said, is a positive mitzvah. V'hu yotze mi midat ahava, v'hu le midat harachamim. So the positive mitzvah, I was to ask you, what is more important? What is more important in Torah, in life, positive mitzvot or negative mitzvot? So you might say it's true that, generally speaking, the negative mitzvot carry a greater punishment. But if we look at it in Hilchot Tzurba, the Rambam talks about the mitzvot that are kalot, the mitzvot chamurot, right? And the mitzvot chamurot, the more stringent things, are nearly all of them negative mitzvot. Only two exceptions, which are positive mitzvot. But nonetheless, the Ramban explains over here. He says that positive mitzvot are related to the midata ahava, to love of Hashem. Ki yaseh mitzvat adonav, ahuv lo v'adonav marachem alav. A person who fulfills that for the master which he wants, that's a sign of his love for him. Midat shamor b'mitzvat lo taseh, v'lo midat adin. On the other hand, shamor, which is a negative mitzvah, that is connected to midat adin, to judgment. Yoseh midat hayirah, that's related to the element of fear. If you think about a relationship that you have with somebody, so the more if you're fearful of somebody, you won't do things that you know that they don't want you to do. But it's a sign of love for somebody when you do the things which they want you to do. That's how you build the relationship. And therefore, says the Ramban, therefore you should know that a positive mitzvah is greater than a negative mitzvah. Obviously, love is greater than fear. It's great that somebody wants to serve, who wants to give, who wants to do something for somebody rather than avoid that which is bad. Based on that, he explains the principle of aseh, halachic principle, which we'll leave for another time. Let's just have a look at the Pnei Halacha, source number 71. And he said, אנשים סבורים שהקדושה מתגלה רק בענייני הרוח כלימוד ותפילה. We've discussed this a little bit over the past Shabbatot, Suda Shlishet and others. He says that people sometimes think that kedusha, spirituality, sanctity, expresses itself only in those spiritual pursuits, so to speak, right? Learning Torah, tefillah, ולא צורכי הגוף. However, physical need, אכילה, שינה, eating, sleeping, עיסוק בנוי, beauty, וטיפוח הגוף, מנוגדים ומפריעים להתעלות ruchanit. Again, it's a very, very non-Jewish concept as well. But certainly by other religions, this is what they would say, that those things will come to impede your spiritual growth. A person should beat down anything physical. One of the lessons of Shabbat is that no, you can, through the physical world, you can imbue kedusha. הקדושה יכולה להתגלות גם באכילה מענגת, also eating, obviously not to eat like a glutton, but you eat to eat nicely, בבגדים נעים, with nice clothes, בסידור הבית, in his house. יתר על כן, השלמות היא דווקא כאשר הקדושה מתגלה בכל מרכיבי המציאות הרוחני והגשמי. There is something greater, something more sanctified about the physical and the spiritual coming together in coexistence. לכן אנו מברכים ישראל בשבת שלום, Shabbat oseh shalom ben harach v'achom. Beautiful idea of Rav Melamed. When we say Shabbat shalom, he says there is shalom, there is peace being brought, harmony being brought about through both the physical and the spiritual. And we talk kach naseh shalom ben ish leishto uben adam l'chavero, and through that there is harmony brought about through people as well. If you turn over the page, so that is just in terms of the idea of Kvod Shabbat, the idea of Zachoret Yom HaShabbat, the positive mitzvah related to specifically our bodily needs as well. The Gemara says something very interesting, specifically about Seudot Shabbat, about the 3 Shabbat meals and Oneg Shabbat. On page 138 at the top, Masechet Shabbat, source number 72. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, Amar B'Yoshua ben Levi, Mishum Baal Kabbat. Kol HaMakayem Shalosh Seudot B'Shabbat. Anybody who fulfills this obligation of eating 3 meals on Shabbat, Mitzor Mishalosh Puraniyot, is rescued from 3 punishments, so to speak. Right, 3 cases of great suffering which will happen in the history of the world in the future: the judgment of Gehinom, or Gog and Magog, the Chevlei Mashiach. By having the 3 Shabbat meals, one will not be subject to the pain and suffering of these things. Okay, the Gemara is obviously on a certain level metaphorical, but what is it trying to teach us? What is the message? So again, see the Pnei Halacha, source number 74. In another passage says, Rav Melamed, Amru Chachamim, Kol HaMakayem Shalosh Seudot B'Shabbat Nitzor Mishalosh Puraniyot. Okay, Od Amru, he says, not only that, there are more statements. Kol HaManeg Shabbat Nitzor Mishabud Malchiyot. Anybody who delights in Shabbat is spared from the Shabud Malchiyot, from the subjugation from other nations. Ha'inyan Shebelo Shabbat Hayinu Mishtabdim Lagamay L'Orach Chomish La'olam Hazeh. This is the message. The message is that without Shabbat, we would all be enslaved to the physical, to the burden of this world. I think we can understand this today probably more than they could in other generations, right? All day, every day you're running, you never have a chance to get away from it. We're always available, we're always on contact, we're always at work, we're always doing these things. The person is always engaged, right, without any break, in order to fulfill their needs, in order to provide for their pleasures and drives. We forget what it's really about. We forget the neshama. It's very difficult to just lift your head above ground, lift your head above the water, and to focus on, right, eternity. And therefore he says, without Shabbat, it would never end. You would never have a stop. You would never have a break, and you'd be engaged in this completely. And that's a natural consequence of that. You would all the time, right? Look here on the translation. It says our spiritual inclinations would be suppressed and silenced. We'd consequently sink into all the world's faults and perversions, which are the cause of all of this calamity. However, when one is privileged to connect to Shabbat with all his being, spiritual, material, through Torah study, prayer, as well as rest and pleasure, etc., he transcends the world's flaws, reaches the eternally good world, thus he is automatically saved from the calamities of this world. That is how he explains. What's behind this Gemara. I say, very interesting. Well, essentially, the message that comes out of all of this is Oneg Shabbat. I don't think that it's just about you being a glutton, fulfilling your bodily pleasures, your drives, your desires. Yes, but that comes in harmony. We are created as a guf and a neshama. We're created as a body and soul, and using and elevating those drives in order to achieve Oneg Shabbat and spiritual fulfillment. That is the highest level. We find this idea not just by Shabbat, we find it by the Chagim as well. There's a well-known machloket in the Gemara Pesachim between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yosef about what is the best way that a person should spend the Chagim. One opinion says you have to choose Kulo Lashem or Kulo Lachem, meaning whatever you do, do it properly. The entire day has to be devoted to a certain pursuit. So if you choose that you want to spend the day eating and drinking and sleeping, well, that's what's called Kulo Lachem, then that's fine, but you have to be the whole day. The other, or if you decide, no, we're coming up to Shavuot, we're going to stay up all night learning, right? It's a little bit difficult, can be at times, but you say, Kulon Hashem, spend the whole day learning, spend the whole day davening, whole day in shul, but right, that's also, okay. That's one opinion in the Gemara. The other opinion is, no, Chatziel, you split it up, right? Chetzio Lachem, v'chetzio Hashem. That's the way we pass them. That sounds a bit more reasonable. You spend half the day davening, and praying and learning Torah, etc. You spend half the day eating and drinking and sleeping, etc. That's what the Gemara says. It's very interesting. We're coming up to Shavuot now. We've passed the halfway point of the Oneg. So the Gemara then says that on Atzeret, which is Shavuot, everybody agrees. Right? We say sometimes you could either have one or the other, but everybody agrees that when it comes to Shavuot, Ba'ina Nami Lachem. That on Shavuot you have to find time also for yourself. Meaning even if you pass in the way, you're going to spend Yom Tov on the whole day learning and davening on Shavuot, you have to have time to eat as well. You would have thought the other way, right? It's a little bit counterintuitive. But the point is that why? When we spend time to stop and to eat and to enjoy ourselves, we're showing that Shavuot, the day we receive the Torah, we're showing we enjoy it. We're showing it's not a burden on us. We're showing it's something that we want. And therefore we have it. So there's a story of the Divrei Chaim of Tzanz. Divrei Chaim of Tzanz says that once he was at the end of Tikkun El Shavuot, having stayed up the whole night learning, having fulfilled that element of it. It was time to go and eat kiddush or breakfast, whatever it is. So he said, "Okay, we've been up the whole night learning. We fulfilled the chetzio." He says, "We fulfilled the chetzio lachem." He says, for him, for the Divrei Chaim, that was where he got the enjoyment from learning Torah. He says, "Okay, we fulfilled the part which is for us. Now we have to go and make kiddush and eat. That's the part which is for us." Again, most of us would be the opposite way around, but that is the idea. So that's the deep message here behind the concept of Oneg Shabbat. Okay, page 128. Page 128. We'll get back to eating in a moment, but two other points which are raised, which the poskim discuss, is relating to limud Torah study, and sleep on Shabbat, which are both a fulfillment of Oneg Shabbat. Everybody knows that Shabbat, right, is Rosh Tevot, is the letter stand for Shena b'Shabbat Ta'anug. Sleep on Shabbat Ta'anug. Every Yeshiva knows it. Okay, so does this actually have a source? The Meiri is one of the Rishonim Source number 53 says like this: Mitzvah Oneg Shabbat Gulad. The mitzvah of Oneg Shabbat is a great, great, great mitzvah. Yerushalmi Amru Bameh Ma'anigo. Okay, so what does Oneg Shabbat mean? So he quotes here the Yerushalmi. Yerushalmi says, Marama, two opinions. Marama b'Shena u'Marama b'Talmud Torah. Again, couldn't be more opposite. One says, what is Oneg Shabbat? Go to sleep. The other opinion says, what is Oneg Shabbat? Go and learn. Some people, it's one and the same. They sit in the shiur and they sleep. They get the best of both worlds. Okay, but that's not what the Yerushalmi means. So he says, "V'lo pelegi." It's not a machloket. Kan b'talmid, kan b'balabai. One is talking about a Torah scholar. One is talking about a balabai. An ordinary the person is not studying. And everybody has to study. Everybody has a mitzvah kviyat itim leTorah. The person who doesn't learn full time. Now, which is which? Doesn't say. It says one of them goes to sleep, and one of them goes to learn. One's a Talmid Chacham, one's a Talmid, and one's a Balabait. Doesn't say which. So says the Meiri, Pershuba Rabotai, says my rabbis understood like this: Shatalmid man go b'Talmud Torah or Balabait b'Shena. Person who is accustomed to learning, their oneg is going to be that they sit and learn. A person who is accustomed to sleeping, well, then their oneg will be that they sit and sleep. Ani omer hefech hadvarim, says the Meiri, I say the opposite. Shatalmid sheshoneh kol yemei hashavua makayem b'Shabbat oneg shena. He says the person who's learning hard the whole week, he can have a break. He can sleep on Shabbat. Right? He needs to refresh himself. He needs to, if he's going to be tired the whole week, he's not going to be able to learn properly. So therefore, it's on extra Shabbat that he goes in as a nap. But the balabait is all week long he's working. When does he have time to sit and learn properly? He should sit on Shabbat and he should learn, and it'll be his on it. ושבתות אל לעסוק בהם בדברי תורה, that's what Chazal tell us. על ידי שטרח בחור ואין לו פנאי, נבנו להם טובים בשבתות, לעסוק בהם בדברי תורה. We're very, very busy during the week, right? Nowadays we're much busier than we were in the Meiri's day, and therefore we have Shabbat to stop and sit and learn, etc. So it says the Rama, who brings us the Rama, who probably never saw the Meiri, I'm sure he saw the Yerushalmi, but he says like this, source 54, so workers and people who are not engaged, certainly not full-time in Torah throughout the week, so if you're not learning Torah the entire week, so then you have more of an obligation on Shabbat to sit and learn. Sitting and learning all week, irony is, the real Talmidei Chachamim don't want to have a break. I once heard a story. It was there was a Talmud in the Mir. Chaim Shmulevitz was the legendary Rosh Hashanah Mir. I think it was a Talmud. He invited to the Rosh Hashanah for Shabbos, and he was so excited. He's going to sit, and he's with the Rosh Hashanah, and he's see mirrors, and he's going to ask questions, whatever it is. Went down, sat down to eat 15 minutes. The meal was over. Chaim went back to learn. Okay. So that's how some people do it. But nonetheless, he says, says the Rama, okay, you're allowed to take a little bit of time off and eat and drink and enjoy. Notice, by the way, everybody says, right, that the limud is an oneg, right? One has to know, it's not something which is, if all the time, the way you view it and the way you see it is sort of a tirch, you have to work hard and you have to push yourself, and it doesn't always come easy. But ultimately, the limud that is meant to be an oneg. Then Mishnah Berurah points out that obviously it doesn't mean that even though a person sleep away the whole day, even for a Talmid Chacham, you can spend time learning, spend a little bit more time sleeping, but you should have the right time as well. I'll just say, I know we have people that are watching a Chutzlar, and they're probably upset with me every time I make comments about Shabbat and the Chutzlar, or it's too short, or it's too long, or whatever it is. This is one place, certainly in the summer, in certain places, I remember in England, when you have a mincha on Shabbos afternoon in the summer at 9:30 at night. And that's mincha. So you have the whole day. So in a time like that, certainly you have time to sleep, you have time to learn, you have time to eat, you have time to do everything. It's maybe an advantage. The disadvantage, of course, is when it comes to winter, when Shabbat's at 4 o'clock. But even here, the truth is that maybe this is probably one of the reasons why the custom developed in Israel, that davening starts a little bit earlier than it does in Chutzlar. The truth is davening is a little bit shorter. So even when Shabbat, certainly now in the summer, You have enough time. Davening starts at 8:30. By the time you get home, you have time to eat, you have time to sleep, you have time to learn. I think you have time to do it all as well. You don't need to leave yourself. Okay, so no one should misunderstand. The Piskei Teshuvot, number 56, he says, Yom Shabbat or Yom Muchanu Muzuman Le'umor Bo, right? There is a certain element which Shabbat is fit for Limud Torah, particularly auspicious. If Posgula mitzad Yitron Nefesh Sheba Adam, Lo'il Kol Mevakesh Torah. And even a person may reach a greater level of understanding when studying on Torah, on Shabbat. Okay, Nehemiah discusses this as well. The Ramah, source number 58, just 131, he says, what we mentioned before, in Ragil B'Shanat Tzarayin Ali B'Plenot Yoni Gulo. Person's accustomed to having a nap in the afternoon. He can still do that. That's still his Oneg Shabbat, and that's fine. But says the Mishnah Brahmi, don't overdo it. They shouldn't bring you to Bitul Torah. Right? As we said, particularly in the summer months where you have a long Shabbat, there's time to do everything. Okay. So we've had our nap, we've had our Limud Torah, we've had our Shiur, we've had everything. It's now time for Seudah Shlishit. So we started talking about this previously. You'll see, we saw, I think last week was what we discussed, that all the meals of Shabbat, what's called a meal means you have bread with it. Okay? What happens when it comes to Seudah Shlishit? Maybe before that, so why is Seudah Shlishit so important? Okay, the Shulchan Aruch over here talks about the time for Seudah Shlishit. It needs to be after Mincha, it needs to be in the afternoon. He doesn't mention it here. I think we saw this earlier on. Let me just find it quickly, where the Shulchan Aruch tells us that we have to be very careful. Yeah, if you have a look just quickly on page 112, source number 15, says the Shulchan Aruch, Yehi Zahir Ma'od Lekayem Seudah Shlishit. That is an interesting language. The Shulchan Aruch does not say that about many mitzvot. One has to be very careful. One has to be very careful to have Seudah Shlishit. Even if a person's already full, see in a moment how correct that is or is not. Sometimes it's not within your control, right? Especially if you're a guest. But he says one has to be very careful to have Seudah Shlishit. Why does the Shulchan Aruch have to tell us you have to be very careful? So on one level, he might be telling us, be careful how much you eat, right? If a person comes to Seudah Shlishit and they're completely stuffed, and they've stuffed their face all Shabbat with 17 courses, and they can't eat a single thing. So then you're patur. That's achila gasai. At that point, there's nothing you can do. You're going to eat something that's going to make you sick. You can't eat. But you should have thought about it before, though. When you're having lunch, when you went back for the fourth helping, okay, you should say you have a third helping, and then we'll have room for Seudah Shlishit. So that is on one level why we have to be careful. But maybe there's more. It's more than that as well. Just going to read to you. This is not appear in your books. But the Chida in Machzik Bracha has a very interesting interpretation. He says like this. He says, if Shavda Kavanah Tzarech Ziru, Lefisha B'Seudah Zoni Kal Kvod HaShabbat. Says the Chida, this meal, the third meal of Shabbat, in which we can recognize the honor of Shabbat. Why? This is something a person does not normally do, right? As we explained last time in the days of the Gemara, what was customary was for people to have 2 meals a day, one morning meal and one night meal. That was the regular. So that's Shlishit is a tosefet. It's something additional, and therefore he says the once at night and once during the day. Seudah Shlishit magdil kvod Shabbat lasot b'seudah mechudeshet. We add on to the honor of Shabbat by having an extra meal. Not only that, says the Chida, that therefore if a person is careful to have the third meal, what are you showing? You're showing that all the meals that you added, all the eating you did was for the honor of Shabbat. So the Seudah Shlishit itself, that elevates the night meal and the morning meal as well. This is where the minhag comes from. Some people call it not Seudah Shlishit, but Shalosh Seudos, right? Everybody calls that, right? That's the Ashkenazi way, and some people get very upset. Why are you calling it Shalosh Seudos? Seudah Shlishit means the third meal. Shalosh Seudos means 3 meals. You're not eating, maybe you are, but you're not eating 3 meals in one go, right? Why do you call it Shalosh Seudos? That's grammatically incorrect. Answer is no. Because if you have the Seudah Shlishit and you're careful with it and you eat in such a way, you're showing that all the eating that we're doing on Shabbat, it's not for our sake, but this is part of the mitzvah of Oneg Shabbat. This is all the Shem Shemayim. So therefore, you're elevating all three meals. He says, you're not having the third meal. This is not in the book again. We'll get back to the book in a moment. But he says, if you only have the two meals which you eat every other day, so then you're showing, why did you have supper? Because you were hungry. Why did you have breakfast? Because you were hungry, right? But you don't have Shabbat. You don't do anything differently because it's Shabbat. So that's just, as the Rambam calls it, that's in cut soul. It's just for your stomach. It's not for anything. And at the kafta, can't you Adam? It's all balayla b'yom. That's what people do. And therefore, mishomachi tzarich lezema od lekayem suda shlishit. Therefore, a person has to be very, very careful in order to fulfill this mitzvah and to have suda shlishit. Okay. So what do we have to have at suda shlishit? This is the next question. So back in our Svarim, source number 62. You'll see the Mishnah Berurah. It's a question that somebody asked me at the beginning of the Shiur. It says, Tov la'adel avrecha layayin toch hasuda. Sorry, we're on page 132. So it's good to have wine at Suda Shlishit. That is based on the Rambam. We saw last week the Rambam says one should have wine at all three Shabbat meals. The Mishnah Berurah says it's a good thing. Yeah, I think the more common minhag is not to have wine at Suda Shlishit, and that's fine. But those who do, that is where it comes from. It should not be confused, by the way. It should not be confused with when we're benching, right? Then you have the benching ala kos, which is after the meal. That is not part of the meal. The general practice is when we do a bekat hamazon over a cup of wine, right? We have a kosher bracha in order to give honor to the brachot, to give significant bracha bekat hamazon. So on Friday night, or on Shabbat morning, or any time during the week, if you have a Shabbat brachot, or whatever it is, a person would say bekat hamazon, and the person saying bekat hamazon holds a cup of wine, and when you finish, they will say brei paragafen, and then drink from the wine. We'll discuss this later on, but when we do it, Suda Shlishit, if one has a kosher bracha, it's a little bit different. The reason is because once you finish benching, so now it's the end of Shabbat, you aren't allowed to eat or drink anything except for water until after Havdalah. And therefore, we will have a cup of wine to give significant kosher bracha, but we would not say the bracha of Brei Paragafen at the end of the Bekat Hamazon and Suda Shlishit. We would leave the cup, and then we would use that cup when we say Havdalah. Right? And that's what we do. That's the minhag over here. But again, if one is drinking wine toch kadeh, so that's different. That's part of the meal, and then one could drink wine. That would be fine. One would, of course, have to say borei priagafen during the meal, because as we've discussed, Hilchot brachot, the bracha v'motzi lechem min haaretz would exempt one from all other brachot on food, but wine is an exception, and that would require its own. Yeah. Yeah, so what I'm saying, so there's two things. So one is what the Mishnah Berurah here is talking about, is that if one wants to drink wine throughout the Suda, that is, one can do that, and that is right. But what I'm talking about now is when we have, let's say, where we have a large meal, if one is just sitting and eating by themselves, then there would be, they would say Birkat Hamazon, and then that would be it. But when you have a Mizuman, you have three men together or more that are benching, or certainly if you have a Minyan, and therefore the prevalent minhag is that we have a kosher bracha. When we say Birkat Hamazon, we say Birkat Hamazon over a cup of wine. So when we conclude the Birkat Hamazon, although we were holding that cup of wine as the kosher bracha, we would not say, the person mentioned would not say Brei Paragafen and drink from the cup, but you would leave that cup until Havdalah, and then you would say the Brei Paragafen, and that's me. Okay. Now, do we need to have bread? This is the big question. So we find a number of opinions on this, and it really depends on what the reason is that we need to have bread at the other three meals of Shabbat. So I'll just say quickly, we find before we see it inside, there are three primary opinions as to why it is that we need bread at our Shabbos meal. One is that in the Psukim we learned out last week, you'll all remember, I'm sure, why do we have three meals on Shabbat? From the Pasuk, talking about the man, that the word Hayom appears three times. We saw actually there was a machloket, three times applied to just the day or the entire period of Shabbat, maybe 3 meals, 4 meals, right? Thankfully, we personally need 3 meals. Sometimes, it's hard to eat Sudan, we should, you have to have a 4. But that's sometimes another milk or whatever it is. But since the man is compared to bread, And therefore, in the same way, if it's reminiscent of the man, we would have to have bread as well as part of our meal. According to that understanding, according to Uraim and others, according to that, there would be no difference between Sudah Shishit and the other meals. You would need bread. A second reason which is brought, and this I think we have discussed previously when we spoke about Kiddush, is brought by Talmidei Rabbeinu Yonah, which is that the reason we have to have bread is not intrinsic to the meal itself, but it's because of the fact that when we say Kiddush, Kiddush has to be with Makom Sudah. So what makes it a bona fide meal for the purpose of Makom Sudah? Generally speaking, it's bread. So when you make Kiddush, you have to have a full meal and you have to have with bread. So that would only apply at a meal at which you make Kiddush. Now, according to the Rambam, we saw it may be that you make Kiddush for Sudah Shlishit, or you just drink wine, but we don't pass Kanoni. So according to that reason, might be that I don't require bread. The third reason, and this is what's brought by Tosfot, is that we have bread at our meals, as we saw previously, as that's part of Oneg Shabbat, or maybe part of Kavod Shabbat. There are those who say Kavod Shabbat, those who say Oneg Shabbat. Part of the honor of Shabbat, giving significance to the meal, is that it includes bread as well. Now, according to that, it would seem that would apply to Sudah Shlishit, the way is the same it would apply to everything else. Right? Why would I make a distinction? Now, the Ran over here in source number 63, he says, we don't have Tosfot in here, but I think this is brought in the same idea, similar idea brought in Tosfot. But he says, the Ran says there are those who say that we are not required to have bread at Sudah Shlishit, rather we can have fruit and Minei Targim. We have to discuss what Minei Targim means. There are a number of different opinions. Doesn't mean specifically mezonot, or doesn't mean fruit, etc. But in other words, it's learned fair from my Grand Sukkah. It's learned out that one does not need to have, is not required to have bread. The Rosh, in source number 64, he explains Minei Targima Hainu Machal Shasoy Mechamesh Taminin. In other words, mezonot. Right, mezonot. That's if one is not going to have bread, they would have to have mezonot. Now, why would you not need to have it? If we say that, again, Sudah Shlishit is part of the mitzvah of Kvod Shabbat, how could I do Kvod Shabbat? What? So it's Kvod Shabbat at the nighttime meal and the daytime meal to have bread, but now it's Kvod Shabbat not to have bread? So maybe you could explain like this, based on the Chidah that we said before. If the idea of Kvod Shabbat is that I'm not just eating an ordinary meal like I normally do, but I'm having something more, something extra. So the first two meals, which are the same as meals that I would have, it can't be that the ordinary meal that I have on Shabbat is less than the ordinary meal that I have on a weekday, on Yom Chol. And therefore, if ordinarily a meal is defined as bread, so on Shabbat a meal is defined as bread. That is for the first two. But the third meal, the very fact that I'm having this meal, this is already something extra. This is already above and beyond. And therefore, I could still, according to this opinion, I could still fulfill the Kvod Shabbat, even if I don't have bread. But it's right. I'm not doing anything less. I'm still doing something more and showing that I have the honor of Shabbat, and therefore that would be possible. However, as we've seen, the Shulchan Aruch, source number 65, everybody agrees. Lekatchila, ideally, one should have a Sudah Shlishit just like the other meals. Tarif lasoto b'pat. One should have bread at Sudah Shlishit. Yesh omrim she'achol lasota b'kol machal asoy me'echad me'chlesh minei b'dat. There are those who say. There are those who say you could have with mezonot, and he goes through a number of different opinions. And if you don't have mezonot, then you could have fruit, or you could have on charcoal, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, the Bold says to the Shulchan Aruch, "Svara rishona ikar shetzarich lasota b'pat ela im ken usaveh bayoter." He says the bottom line is one should have bread for Sudah Shlishit unless you're very, very full and you're not able to eat it. Again, it's difficult to eat, and this is what we said before. That is why the Shulchan Aruch tells us you need to be careful. Right? A person comes to Sudah Shlishit and says, "Oh, I'm too full to have a surprise. Now I'm too full and I'm not going to be able to eat Sudah Shlishit." Well, you should have known that because the same thing happened to you last week, and the week before, and the week before, and the week before. So a person needs to plan their eating that they're able to have Sudah Shlishit ideas. As I mentioned, right? Shout out to those in Chutzlaretz again. When you're in the winter and then the day finishes at 4 o'clock and there's half an hour between lunch and Sudah Shlishit, in such situations it's almost impossible. Even if you have a little bit, how are you going to have Sudah Shlishit? But that's just another reason why you shouldn't be in Chutzlaretz. But there you go. Says the Piskei Teshuvot, number 66. He says, "Rak shekara mikra shel ones shesaver beyoter or choli." Person's very, very poor. Person's ill. Or person's unable to eat. Ve'ino yachol lasot ha'ra'ui lo. ודאי יעשה מצוותו ככל אפשרו, לפי סדר עדיפויות דלהלן. So he's saying, only under case of honest, that's the case when you would not have Suda Shlishit, but generally speaking, you should have, and this is the order of priorities. Again, as we've seen, priority is ideally bread, below that mezonot, and below that other food as well. Where it becomes very, very difficult and very interesting, and this is going to come up in about just under a year, this is going to be a practical, relevant halacha for all of us, is when Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbat. So when Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbat, along with a number of difficulties and opportunities, which that raises as well, there's something very, very nice as well, that having Shabbat to get ready and coming into Leil HaSeder through the Roga and through the Kushav Shabbat, it's a different Leil HaSeder. It's a different Leil HaSeder. So one of the things is, we know we have to stop eating chametz very, very early on the day of Erev Pesach. Now, generally speaking, on Erev Pesach, when it's a weekday, so it's at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock in the morning already, right? You can't eat any more chametz. So it's a little bit of, you can't eat matzah yet either. That's why it's complicated, right? Because we have to wait until the night before we can eat the matzah. And anything which we can't eat, so much, matzah shira, can you a bunch of. So if it's a weekday, it's annoying. You know, the kids are running around, what can we eat? What can we eat? What can we eat? And they do that every day anyway. But that's the thing. But if it's Shabbat, so you need to have. So we have. So we'll daven early so that we can go home and we have time to eat lunch and then finish. But then what about Sudash Lishit? You're now telling me you're going to finish eating Sudash Lishit by 10 o'clock in the morning. So that seems a little bit. So how do we do that? So there's a big discussion. That is an exceptional case. What we want to do?
Is on Motzei Shabbat.
Yes. So Shabbat is right. So Shabbat is Erev Pesach. Shabbat is the day. But how do you fulfill Sudash Lishit? It's coming here. Yes. We also have Rosh Hashanah, which is close to Shabbat. It's 3 days. All sorts of interesting calendrical permutations. It's good material for Rosh Hashanah. Okay, so we'll be fine. But that's an exceptional case. In any event, ordinarily it's easier to plan for that. Shut Shevet HaLevi, source number 67, tells us about why Sudash Lishit. Again, ideally we said Sudash Lishit needs to be bread, but whereas by the other meals you have to have bread no matter what. Yeah, a person is unable to, so they could still fulfill it. Otherwise, he says, the first 2 meals which they were accustomed to eat all the time anyway, as we said before, that is, in order to fulfill the standard of a meal which you would have had on a weekday anyway, you need to have bread. The third meal is in addition, and therefore not because it's the daily meal, but because it's a mitzvah, something else. Therefore you could have these other foods if you needed to. You already had the regular meal of the day. One more point in terms of the timing of Sudash Lishit. So the Shema Shabbat Kevchata tells us, one should daven mincha first before Sudash Lishit. If it's not possible, you could still have Sudash Lishit before mincha. So for example, Shabbat Hagadol, Shabbat Shuvah, something like that. Normally, if let's say we come and we'll come to shul, we'll have mincha, and then we'll have Sudash Lishit. But if on a certain occasion, for whatever reason, that is pushed off, or that you're in shul for the shiur, and only there is mincha, so you could eat Sudash Lishit at home before you come back from mincha. However, one should ideally, it should be machzit hashah achrei chatzot hayom ve'elach. It should still be after chatzot. ואף אם הגיע זמן מנחה קטנה, עדיין 2:30 לפני הלילה, נוהגים לעכל ולאכול, להתפלל אחרי כן. Right, so one could eat Sudash Lishit before davening mincha. Nonetheless, יש להיזהר שלא לאחר את זמן תפילה, נוהגים לעכל ולאכול, אחרי כן, יש להיזהר שלא לאחר את זמן תפילת מנחה. In such a case, one needs to be careful, make sure that one still goes and davens mincha at the proper time, etc. And what he is relating to here is that generally speaking, when it comes to mincha time, then we have a restriction not to begin a meal because we're worried the person will begin a large meal, you'll forget to daven mincha, etc. So one should be careful about that. If one has a fixed time for davening or something to remind them, that would be okay. Right. So the latest would be when we have to start eating before Shkia. And the reason there is because, well, that's while it's still certainly Shabbat, but also we have another problem, which is we'll discuss in future Shiurim, because when we get close to Motzei Shabbat, we get close to Havdalah, so then we're not allowed to start eating when the time for Havdalah is approaching. This is, by the way, another reason why it's good to eat bread and not other things. Often the custom is that we would start Seudat Shliashit late into the day, and we would extend it beyond the time of Shabbat. So if you're eating a bread meal and you started to eat bread before the Shkia, then you can carry on eating as long as you haven't stopped. You can carry on eating as long as you want because it's the continuation of the meal. But if you're not eating bread, so then it's not clear that what you're eating is connected together as a meal necessarily. Once we are close to time for Havdalah, then one may have to stop eating. So it becomes a little bit more complicated, but we'll discuss that in the future. The next topic we have, I think, is Hilchot Motzei Shabbat and Havdalah. So that will take us through over the next couple of weeks. And then I think after that, that's it for the Zachor, and then we'll start getting into the Shamos, the introduction, the Melachot of Shabbat, Bishul, etc. So that will be the program for the next few weeks.
Yeah.